In here, and in this film form video, we're going to be looking at non-continuity editing. Now, from the last video, you'll remember that the point about continuity editing is supposed to be invisible. You're not supposed to notice it. Non-continuity editing is the opposite. It's self-consciously highly stylized, and it's designed to be noticed by the audience. You are meant to be going, "Oh, I like that cut." Right? Now, the point about continuity editing is that it disrupts the diegetic effect. So you're meant to be thinking with non-continuity editing, oh, you're reminded all the time you're watching a movie. It's very formalist. It's about form, not narrative. Okay? People tend to get stuck into this idea that films should be about storytelling, that are about narrative, and that is just not true. Films do not have to have a story. There's no reason why they should have. Films can be about style, they can be about mood, they can be about an aesthetic, they can be about an emotion. They do not have to literally make sense as a story. Right? Now, sometimes films don't make sense because they're badly written. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, we're looking at you. Right? They make no sense. Right? That's bad filmmaking. Sometimes films aren't meant to make sense. Right? Look at the films of surrealist cinema. Look at David Lynch. You know, a David Lynch film like Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway doesn't make much sense narratively. It's more like a dream logic. It's, you know, when you're having a nightmare, they don't necessarily have to make sense. Things can change and warp and be completely nonsensical and still be terrifying. Right? So sometimes films are subconsciously stylish and you're supposed to notice the way that they're made. So what kind of elements have we got of non-continuity editing? Well, we've got the basic ones, which, let's face it, are so common they may as well be continuity editing techniques. We've already talked about montage. You've also got flash forwards and flashbacks. They're another one that's very common. You've got ones not actually kind of editing at all in the traditional sense of cutting, but split screen. Then you've got breaking the fourth wall. You've got the most technically non-continuity editing technique, that's a jump cut. And then you've got how it creates meaning. So you've got intellectual montage, graphic matches, and the Kuleshov effect, which is the basis of how all editing works. All right. So we'll be going through these one by one. First one's the flashback and flash forward. I mean, this is fairly obvious. A flashback is an alteration of story order in which the plot moves back to show events that have taken place earlier than the one already shown. And a flash forward is the opposite, an alteration of story order in which the plot point presentation moves forward to future events and then returns to the present. Not as common, but it does happen. Right? Flashbacks or flash forwards are often indicated by a close-up, or maybe an extreme close-up of the character's eyes. There will then be a transition, a dissolve, or the classic wobbly dissolve, even a wipe. And then there will be things that indicate that the flashback or flash forward is different from, you know, contemporaneous time. So it could be it's in black and white, or it's desaturated of colour, it's in soft focus, maybe even a combination of these techniques. Sometimes it will have a kind of echoey sound, like it's echoing in their head. So they're often used for showing memories. Split screen. That's where the image is literally split into different sections. In the last video I showed you a shot from Time Code by Mike Figgis, where we had the 4 stories going on simultaneously. That's split screen. They're often used to show parallel action, so instead of intercutting and cross-cutting, you can see things happening in different places at once. One thing they used to do a lot in the 50s, for example, was use split screen to show both halves of a telephone conversation without having to use a shot reverse shot structure. Not technically really a kind of editing. Well, I mean, it is. But editing usually only shows one thing on screen at once. So whether you'd consider this editing or mise-en-scène or both, could go either way, really. Now, another thing that's been going on, as long as they've been making films, this is not a new idea, but there's breaking the fourth wall. Those of you who do drama will have heard of Bertolt Brecht and his idea of the Brechtian alienation device, or Befremdungseffekt in German. Not expecting you to remember that, but what a good word. Befremdungseffekt. Anytime you can use a word like that, it's a good day. Right, but anyway, breaking the fourth wall. This is where the characters in the film break the diegetic effect. They burst the diegetic bubble by directly addressing the audience or directly addressing the fact that they are in a movie. And it draws the attention of the spectator to the fact that they're watching a film. Now, this can be, as I said, in literally turning to the audience and talking to them. There are plenty of films that do this, whether it be Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Wayne's World or Deadpool or whatever. It's usually done in a comedy, but not always. There are films like Alfie, for example, that do the same thing. A good example on television would be Fleabag, right? So they're breaking the bubble world that the story takes place in. But sometimes it might not be that direct. It might just be because the film is drawing attention to its filmmaking techniques. So if you watch a film like, let's say for the sake of an argument, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? Nobody in that film directly turns to the audience and talks to them. But there are loads and loads of things in that film that are constantly reminding you you're watching a movie. The pop-up graphics, the split screens, the flashbacks, the flash forwards, the onomatopoeic sound effects written as text on screen because it's trying to make it look like a comic book, right? All that's technically breaking the fourth wall as well because you know you're watching a movie. Jump cuts. Jump cuts are cuts you're meant to notice. They're often sudden and violent. They're often used in action sequences to connote confusion and chaos. But they're less noticeable there. Again, it's a difficult thing to be able to describe to you without showing it to you. I would love to be able to show you some clips, but, copyright, right? I'll show you some in class. But, this was particularly pioneered by Jean-Luc Godard, specifically in his film of Bout de Souffle, or Breathless in English. That's where it really got pioneered. But other ones I can think of, one that always strikes me is a bit in Darren Aronofsky's film Black Swan, where we're basically following Natalie Portman as she's walking down the street. Instead of just seeing it in one go, it sort of like jumps. Cuts bits out of it. It's used for ellipses as well. They're the most common kind of non-continuity editing technique, I'd argue. But now let's have a think about how all editing works. What's the fundamental philosophy behind it all, and how can that be used in a non-continuity editing technique context? Right? So, Lev Kuleshov. Lev Kuleshov is a film scholar, or was. The first people to seriously take film seriously and consider it an art form were the Russians. And back in the 1920s, or maybe in the late teens actually, the Soviet state established the Moscow Film School to study cinema. The Russians, and to a lesser extent the Nazi Germans, saw film as an incredibly powerful tool for propaganda. If you're trying to spread the message of communism, but you're doing it to a largely uneducated and illiterate peasant population who can't read, then you have to find other ways to communicate quite complex political ideology in a way that's simple and easy for an uneducated, illiterate audience. And they saw cinema as the perfect way to do this. So what they wanted to do was to be able to use the juxtaposition of images to communicate complex ideas. And it was the Moscow Film School that the early experiments on how this could be done. And Kuleshov was one of the teachers at the Moscow Film School, and people like Sergei Eisenstein, Podovkin, and some of the other early Soviet, Ziga Verdov, for example, these Soviet filmmakers learnt their trade at the Moscow State School. And Lev Kuleshov pioneered the very early ideas of what is called montage cinema that were later developed by people like Sergei Eisenstein. And one of the things they did is he pioneered the so-called Kuleshov experiment that established the concept of the Kuleshov effect. Now, this is what he did. Lev Kuleshov edited a short film in which he took a shot of an expressionless face of a Tsarist matinee idol called Ivan Mazovskin, or something like that. I apologise for butchering his name. And alternated it with other shots. A plate of soup, a girl in a coffin, and a woman on a divan. The film was shown to audiences who believed the expression on Mazovskin's face was different each time he appeared, depending whether he was looking at the plate of soup, the girl or the coffin, and the woman on the divan. And they interpreted the same blank expression as meaning different things, hunger, grief, desire, depending on what that image was juxtaposed with. Right? So, Vesevlod Podovkin, who later claimed to be the co-creator of the experiment, described in 1929 how the audience raved about the acting, the heavy pensiveness of his mood over the forgotten soup, where they were touched and moved with a deep sorrow which he looked at the dead child, and noted the lustre which he had observed the woman. But we knew in all cases the face was exactly the same. Now, how does that work? Right, you've got this face. That is Mazovskin. We look at his face, and we're thinking, what's this tell me? How do I interpret this image? How do I understand what I'm looking at? Well, on its own, I can't. It's a blank expression. But then you cut, and we see a bowl of soup. And subconsciously, in your brain, you're thinking, what am I looking at this for? Well, it must have some kind of relationship to that image I saw before. Right, okay, so what could that relationship be? Well, he must be looking at that bowl of soup. Right, okay, he's looking at that bowl of soup, right? Then we cut to this reaction shot, which is the same shot. Now, we don't know this, but it's the same shot. And we're thinking, all right, if someone was looking at a bowl of soup, how might they be thinking? Oh, well, he must be hungry. Yeah, God, yeah, he's hungry, obviously, right? We see a look on someone's face. There's no real expression on it. We're thinking, I don't understand this. What's he feeling? Well, what's he looking at? Cut. Oh, look, a dead child in a coffin. Well, how would that make you feel? Oh, he must be grieving. Yeah? He's looking at something. What's he looking at? I don't know. He looks pretty blank expression. Oh, he's looking at this attractive woman on the divan. Ooh, how does that make him feel? Full of lust. Same face every time. What the Kuleshov effect tells us is that images in isolation have no inherent meaning. The meaning comes in the collision of ideas, in the juxtaposition of images. Shot A, shot B equals meaning C. Right? Shot A in its own doesn't mean anything. Shot B in its own doesn't mean anything. It's only together they create a meaning. Now, that's a simplistic way of looking at it, because that's not entirely true, is it? Because a shot on its own can have meaning. Because the mise en scène can be creating meaning. Right? There are, even in a still image can create a sense of meaning. Right? It could be just the look on the person's face. It could be the way it's lit. It could be the juxtaposition of objects within the frame, the framing. All these things create meaning as well. So it's more complicated than just the editing, but these two things work together, don't they? Right? So it makes it a complex idea. All editing works like this. Kuleshov effect is the basis of all editing, even continuity editing. So we're not talking about simple editing here. We're talking about something called montage. Now, on a basic level, montage is just the French word for editing. So if you're watching a French film and you're seeing the titles come up, they will have monteur. And it's just the editor, right? But it's more than that, because European, more art house tradition of filmmaking had a very different philosophy to the American continuity editing system. The continuity editing system is more like sculpture, right? In which you have a block of raw material, which is all the footage you've shot, and you cut away what you don't want, and what's left is your film, right? So it's more like a sculpture. European montage system is more like building a wall. You've got your basic shot, let's say your master shot, and that's your foundation. And then you add stuff to it, each individual bit, like a brick in a wall, and you glue it all together with mortar, and that's your final film. So, continuity editing is more a system of removal, montage is more of a system of building. And you can use it to create meaning. Intellectual montage can create meaning that's not inherent in either shot on its own. And this can be quite sophisticated and complex, which is what the Russians were trying to do. They were trying to communicate these complex political meanings. And if we look at the montage sequence we showed in the last video from Vertigo, again, this is show, don't tell. There is no expositional dialogue here. It's communicating complex meanings through the visuals. Now, partly this is through performance. It's, Jimmy Stewart thrashing around on the bed. It's in the makeup because they've sprayed his face with, water to make it look sweaty and clammy. It's in the use of the coloured filters. The bizarre, strange colours. But it's in the montage of these bizarre images. It's showing us as a dream. Right? Because we see him in bed, we see him thrashing around, we see what's going on, we assume it's in his head. So these was clear, it was thoughts, right? So we see this bunch of flowers, it's telling us that's significant, but they break apart. Well, that's a distressing image, isn't it? And then we see, him, Scotty talking to Gavin in the background. We got Coletta in the background, and now she's coming to the foreground. And now we see what we think is a painting, but it's actually the actress recreating the painting. And then the camera pushes in on the locket, or the necklace, and we're suddenly thinking, oh, that's significant, that's important, I must remember that. And then we see him like he's trying to run and escape, and he goes back to the graveyard where Carlotta was, and we see the empty grave, and this bizarre image of these like rays coming out of his head, and it sort of like symbolises his vertigo, because it looks like the shafts of the tower, but it also sort of like symbolises his horror. It's like this stuff beams coming out of his head, and green is the colour of sickness and illness, and we see him falling like Madeline. He shows his distress as the world disappears around him, and he sits up in horror and smash cut. Every one of these images on its own doesn't mean anything. It's only in their juxtaposition. It shows that he is starting to make sense of this mystery. Now, where does this idea come from? Sergei Eisenstein, one of the most important filmmakers in all of history. He made some of the most important films ever made. He was a Soviet propagandist. He made propaganda films. He made a number of important films. I'd probably say his most important are October, Strike, and one of the most important films ever made, Battleship Potemkin. You cannot be a serious film fan if you've not seen Battleship Potemkin. And he pioneered 6 types of montage, right? They're quite complicated. You don't necessarily need to know all of them. About 4 of them are particularly important. but this is what they are. Metric montage. That is where the cutting is done purely based on the length of the shot. Right? Metric montage creates a rhythm and pace. So think about the speed of the editing. If the shots are very short and the editing very quick, then that's going to connote a sense of excitement, of chaos, of drama, right? If the shots are very long, there's not much editing in it, and there's not much camera movement, then that's going to be a much calmer, more sedate kind of atmosphere. So the speed of the cutting can be very important for creating meaning. Rhythmic montage, much like metric montage, is based on time and tempo, but it concerns itself with what's in the frame. So cutting in tempo with the action, basically. It's how things are moving on screen. So metric and rhythmic montage will work hand in hand. Very important for, say, music videos, or action sequences, or dance scenes. So metric and rhythmic montage are very important if you're looking at any of the movies we're doing. There's an action sequence in it. So La La Land in particular, and Fallen Angels, and Apocalypse Now. Tonal montage isn't concerned with time, but with the tone of the shot. The lighting, the shadows, the shapes, and the frame. Cutting between shots of different aesthetic tones creates meaning, contrast, and binary opposites. This is a less important one, I'd argue, for you to know. Overtonal. This is a large-scale macro idea. It combines metric, rhythmic, and tonal montage and how they all work together. Difficult one to really wrap your head around that one. I'm not sure I'd bother. And the last one here is intellectual or dialectical montage. This is the most important one for non-continuity editing. Now, metric, rhythmic, tonal, and overtonal are all part of continuity editing and non-continuity editing. But it's intellectual or dialectical montage is the most important one. This is less about emotional responses, but more about intellectual. It's about trying to make you think something, right? It expresses abstract ideas by creating relationships between opposing visual concepts. Again, it's a difficult one to explain without showing you it. But when I'll show you in class is from the beginning of the Charlie Chaplin film Modern Times. At the beginning of that, we see a shot of a group of workers walking towards a factory. We then see them coming out of a subway station. And then it cuts to a shot which has the same composition and screen direction and movement of sheep being herded. Now, in our head, we're thinking, what? I was looking at workers a minute ago, and now I'm looking at sheep. Those are two completely unrelated images. On their own, they don't mean anything. And then you're sat there thinking, well, what could that mean? What is the relationship between those two things? And then you're thinking, well, okay, what do I know about sheep? Well, stereotypically, they're stupid. They're easily controlled and easily manipulated. Oh, right, they're saying that about the workers. Right, that is an intellectual montage. And you're meant to notice it. Then you've got the match cut or the dissolve. Oh, before I go on to that, there is also vertical montage, but I'll talk about that when I do sound. Vertical montage is the relationship between the image and some other elements, and that could be on-screen graphics like intertitles in a silent film, subtitles in a film in a foreign language, or it could be the music. So, graphic matches. A graphic match or match cut, doesn't have to be a cut, it can be dissolved, so it can be match dissolved, is where objects which appear similar are used in successive shots, sometimes to imply a link. They can be used for transitions to show change of time and change of place. Again, in Vertigo, we see a close-up of the necklace around Judy's neck. Then we have a flashback in Scotty's mind as he remembers the necklace and the painting of Carlotta, and that is the point in the film where he realises that Judy was Madeline all along. Hashtag spoiler alert. Right? And more importantly, we already knew that Judy was Madeline. But this is the point where we, the audience, have realised that Scotty knows the truth. That is non-continuity editing. This will be much more important for experimental cinema, but there's a load of non-continuity editing in Apocalypse Now. But it's not so common in most of the other movies we're watching. Right? There is a bit of breaking the fourth wall going on in 1 week. But quite a complicated idea, non-continuity editing. It's quite difficult to explain without having clips to show you, but I'll try and work on that in class. If you've got any questions, you know where I am. Next up is sound, and I'll see you in the next one.